Hey, Ishika, how are you?
I'm very well. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. So I want to get you on to talk about your role of how, like, we spoke a while for a while, and like you haven't tracked anymore. You're in a position now where you love training. You're able to manage your food intake and basically be at this point where a lot of people really want to be. The self-perceived element of like not needing to track and being able to maintain their weight. So I'd like to discuss that journey. So when did you or why did you remove or move away from tracking in the first place?
Okay. So like I've mentioned before, like I started my fitness journey in 2015, and so I've been tracking for a very long time. And when I first started, I was very much tracking every single day. I was on the 1200 calorie diet, tracking every single day and being very, very meticulous about it. And because I've been tracking for so long, I feel like I got to a point where I'm pretty confident that I have enough knowledge about food and about basically all of the macronutrient, all of that stuff, my portions, all of those. And so this year I kind of decided that it was like I feel confident enough and that it is time for me to kind of stop tracking completely.
Yeah, it's interesting. What did you do in that first week between not tracking and tracking that was different?
Oh God. So I think the first week I was really nervous because it was something that was such a not necessarily a huge part, but it was a part of my life that was like I was so used to just pulling out my scale before like making my coffee or having my breakfast. So that's how my day started every single day. But when I decided that I have to stop or I want to stop, I used the quarter plate rule. Yeah. So I used that and like I feel like that really, really, really helped me. And it was a nice transition where I didn't completely let go of all of the things that I'd learned. It was just kind of being more aware of the food that I was eating. And because I tracked, I already had that awareness and it was just kind of time to utilize that awareness.
Yeah, so when you mean awareness, you're referencing things like protein at every meal, or like you know that you haven't supposed to have veggies, so you'll have veggies at most meals, or you have a rough estimate of the foods that you're eating.
Yeah.
When you try, like, let's say for example, hypothetically, you're trying a new food this week and you have never tried it before, you've never seen it before, would you still not track it and you would just go with the flow, or is there a way that you're changing things when you don't know the specifics about something?
Um, like I don't really it's weird because I don't really view food as different macros and my brain just does not divide that into those categories anymore. Like I just eat because like I know that I will eat a certain amount and I feel like I'm in a place where I'm really in touch with my hunger cues and my fullness cues. So even if it's a case where it's a food that I've never tried before, I'll still eat what I want to eat and how much I want to eat, and then I'll just stop there.
That's a great point, and then it brings on to the next thing, which is those hunger cues and fullness cues. Talk to me about your relationship with those. Like, how is that has got, I know that you've done diets before and you got in your little bikini and got on the stage in India. Um, how did your hunger cues and satiety cues change over time as well?
So when I first started, I had no idea what fullness felt like. It was either being absolutely stuffed, and that to me was the feeling of fullness. It was either that or starving. There was no in between. There was no like, oh, I'm satiated, or like there just wasn't like it's enough now. It was just okay, go all in, absolutely stuffed, and or just starving basically. But over time, I think when I made the decision to be like, my goal was always to move away from tracking. It was never going to be a case where I'm going to track forever. So when I decided that, I also decided that I had to be more aware of how my body feels with certain food and how much I'm eating and how that makes me feel. And I think I kind of lost that when obviously I was started getting into prep, because of like most of the time you're just hungry, and I got down to about 800 calories a day, which is pretty low. So, and doing 45 minutes of cardio every day. So I was just constantly hungry. And when I transitioned from that into just obviously not prepping anymore, normal life, it went on the other side where I was just binging constantly and I was overeating constantly. And I think at some point I just got really tired of doing that. Like, because you get to a point where you just really like don't like what you see, and that's where I got to a point where um I just didn't like what I saw in the mirror or how I felt. And yeah, since I started working with him, um like we've kind of worked on getting back in touch with my hunger and my satiety cues, and we've used the hunger and fullness cue to decide them. So every time I was tracking my meals, after each meal, I'd look at the scale and go, okay, this is where I'm at now. And that really, really helped me.
Yeah,
So,
that's it's so true because if you've always tracked, or let's say for example, you've gone from no education at all and you've just been given a plate by your mum or your dad, or you've
yeah.
been given a plate by a restaurant, they're not actually your portion sizes. That's the recommended portion sizes by someone else. And I
Yeah.
always say you've always got two places to be able to control portions. You've got how much goes onto your plate, and then you got from your plate into your gob. If you control those two places, or at least one of them, you'll do pretty well. And those people that go from no education, that go straight into tracking, will then perceive the amount that they track as what their body needs or requires. And they slowly and surely realize that even if you track and you don't choose the right food sources or you don't eat it in a certain way, you still end up either full or overstuffed. And the goal, and like you're saying here, is the ability to actually take it away from numbers that are externally validated by calories or volume of foods to actually, hang on a minute, what the fuck do I want? What does my body say is good enough for me? Now, if you've had, and this, I'm probably just preaching, but like if you've had 20 years of you stuffing yourself till your plate is full, or you've had 20 years of you being told by your parents that you have to finish that plate, then it becomes really difficult for you to sit in a restaurant and actually go, I am full on the inside, but there's something in my brain saying, eat the rest of that food. Have you ever experienced any of that type of stuff as you were transitioning or as you went through?
Yeah, 100%. I think it's that guilt. It's weird because it's just like you said, because it's so ingrained in you to finish all the food in your plate, you feel guilty about not, like, even when you're full, you still continue to eat because there's that guilt that, oh, if I don't finish my food, even though there are no consequences to to not finishing that food, there is still that guilt. And I think for me, like, that was probably one of the things that I had to kind of learn to step back from, because it takes enjoyment out of it completely. Because if I go to a restaurant and I am at a point where I'm really satisfied with what I've eaten and I'm like really content, and then it goes to a point where actually I have to finish what's on my plate, it's just like it kind of ruins everything for me. Um, so now if I eat something, if there's something on my plate and I don't finish the food, like I'm okay. Like I don't feel guilty. And yeah.
Like there's two things there. One is that you perceive that's what you paid for. You paid to be full, right? That's kind of the mantra of the plate, right? But other people who may struggle with this, and I'm in this boat because it's fatties for life over here, is that you associate a great meal with that feeling of overstuffedness. And that can be a really hard transition to move out of because actually, as you mentioned there, you said your enjoyment of the meal would be prohibited by you overstuffing yourself. But when actually overstuffing yourself is the enjoyment of the meal, which a lot of people get, that becomes a bit of a sticky one still. And then the second part of that is that I'm just going to go on that point because I forgot what the second one was. But being able to negotiate those variables is a very difficult situation because your enjoyment is wrapped up in your perception of what that meal means. And I think then you have to change what your perception of the meal is. Oh, and the second point I was going to mention is I heard a good quote off Adam. I was sitting dinner with him, Adam Haley, and we're talking about someone that used to just like jam-packed food into their face because they wanted to get their money's worth. And he said something very interesting that I've never heard him say before, but I never heard. He said, I got what I paid for. I got full, not I got my money's worth. Like, so his perception, very similar to yours, is that the enjoyment, but also the goal of what you're getting in front of you is to be full, not to get your money's worth of it, right? So, and he's another one of those intuitive eaters that eats Deliveroo and takeaway every single day, but stays in shape because he doesn't eat all of it. So, just very, very interesting. Like,
Yeah.
what fundamental? Sorry, go on.
Sorry, you go on.
No, I was going to change subject. So,
Okay, I think also if you're going into a restaurant like this, trying to get your money's worth and associating that with the feeling of like overstuffing yourself, then I think getting back in touch with your like, you know, hunger cues and stuff, and then seeing like that experience as an enjoyment of like the foods that you've tried, or I think that's more important.
yeah, no, 100%. So, talk to me about, right? So, you've got a plate of food in front of you.
Yeah.
How do you eat it to ensure that you don't, and it can be graphic, but this, how do you eat it uh, so that you get max amount of taste, enjoyment, but then what are you saying to yourself during those times? Or obviously when you first started, probably now you don't need to do that, but what I want to try and give a step-by-step guide for someone that is on the other end of the coin here to be like, oh wait, I want them to get that moment where they're like, oh shit, I've had half of my dinner and I'm full. I don't need
Yeah,
the other half.
I think so I try not to watch anything when I'm eating, especially in the beginning when I kind of transitioned. I made sure that I was fully aware of what was going in my body and how I was feeling and what the taste was, how I was chewing it, all of those small details. And when your mind is distracted and you're just eating for the sake of eating, you don't realize when you're full and you don't realize when you're kind of satiated. So now I try and eat slow. I'm very aware of like what I'm eating, how I'm eating. I make sure that I'm really chewing slowly. And I know it's one of those things that they tell you when you're a kid, like, oh, chew slowly, like all of those stuff. But like that really, really, really helps. And for me, that's kind of been, even though it's such a small thing, like that's kind of changed a lot for me in building kind of like that, not overstuffing myself.
Yeah, no, that's huge. I think there's on that point when you mentioned about when you got told when you were younger, I think there's actually a really big correlation between what we get told when we're younger and the resentment that we have towards it. So therefore, we don't do it at all costs. Like
Yeah,
I don't know if you ever got this, but like I know a lot of people who struggle with bedtimes because
yeah,
when they say you need to go to bed at 10 or they decide to go to bed at 10, they've been so many years of them being like, go to bed now, or 10 o'clock's your bedtime, you need to go to bed, that, you know, over the years, you end up resenting that because you want to stay up and watch that TV at 11. You know, I used to sneak down when my mum and dad went to bed for no other reason other than that they told me I couldn't do it. So then I did it and then played FIFA till 4 a.m. in the morning, then was fucked to school. But that was driven by resentment. And the same with this whole thing, uh, the whole element of like eat slowly, because they're things that take away perceptive enjoyment out of your childhood, and then that resentment then causes you to not want to do them when you're older. So if someone says, you know, eat slowly, you're just gonna be like, you already hear in the back of your mind the 20 years of like your mum and dad going that, and you're like, oh fuck off. And then it's the same process, and then you can't get yourself to do it because it's already resentment. Um, so hopefully that will give some people a good idea of how they can just chew and be mindful of that. Like I want to talk to you about, and I want you to talk to me, sorry, about the element of like what you transitioned from. So, you know, talk to us about what you had when you were tracking. What was your meal constructs like? Like what type of things were you having for breakfast? What were you having for dinner? And what do you do now? Like, do you keep very similar structures? Do you have it wildly different? Do you go with the flow? What's your week like on that?
I think now there's a lot more variety in, whereas like before, because I had to hit a certain calorie goal or macro goal, I wouldn't eat certain food because it was out of that range. Um, And I think a lot of like the breakfast and like lunches, they're very similar still because I'm so used to eating the same amount. And I do genuinely find enjoyment in the food that I'm eating. And I did before, so even when I was tracking. So in the morning, oats, a big bowl of oats, lunchtime, rice and chicken, all of those stuff. Like I still eat those food because I like it and they're really easy. But now I like, if there are days where I'm a little bit lazy to cook breakfast, I'll have a Deliveroo, and I will still pick things that I normally would eat, but maybe there'll be like an added syrup, or like maybe there'll be like a bar of like chocolate on top. So yeah.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting. And like when you're, but then at the same time is the element of those principles that we just spoke about now then takes care of the rest of it, right? It takes care of how much you eat of that, as opposed to, if you were to, you ordering a Deliveroo from Creams, let's say, for example, because Creams is fucking fantastic, and you order, let's say, for example, you order what I order, which is the waffle with 2 scoops of ice cream, normally vanilla because I'm a basic bitch, and then you've got like crunchy, um, lotus spread, and then you have something like Kinder Bueno as a bit of a sweetener. Normally in my mind, if I'm buying creams, then that would all be gone. In the 4 quarters, they wouldn't be an issue. They would be all done and dusted. But what you're saying is that even if you were to have that, that doesn't change the fundamentals of the way that you eat it. So actually, you may, even though you've ordered Deliveroo and spent £15 on creams, you'd still, if you only had a quarter of it and that was your fullness, then that would be it and it would be gone.
Yeah, because for me now, I associate what, like when I eat something or when I go out to eat or when I order delivery or takeaway, for me, it's important that I've enjoyed my meal. And it, like, I don't have to necessarily finish it in completely in order for me to know that that was a good meal.
Mm.
It's just, okay, I've tasted, even if it's just like I ordered in, I decided suddenly that I just want to have like a tablespoon of it or just a bite of it. And I was full and I was really satisfied with what I've eaten. For me now, that's enough. Like and yeah.
Has there ever been a point of where you've tried to do that, but then not felt satisfied and then struggled with that feeling of satisfaction?
Yeah, I think in the beginning, because when you give yourself like, there's a transition period where you're trying to give yourself permission. And I think because there are certain food that you wouldn't eat, giving yourself that permission, like in the back of your mind, you still have that mindset where you're like, okay, I like tomorrow I might change my mind and I decide that I don't want to track anymore, or tomorrow I might decide that actually I'm not going to give myself permission to eat that food. And then that kind of, because you haven't done it enough times, you kind of go over, like, because you feel like, well, never going to eat it again, you end up overstuffing yourself, or basically eating a little bit more than you kind of originally planned.
Yeah, but it's like the opportunist mentality, isn't it? It's like
Yeah.
I had a client yesterday saying that she's going to go to a social event that had a big dessert truck there, and she's like, I don't know when we're going to do this again. It's a once in a lifetime opportunity. And then I just messaged her back saying, you can have it if you want to, but here's the thing, like, why don't you just get the good guy to come for your birthday instead of you creating this opportunist mentality that you can't surpass? and
Yeah.
and I think giving the perception that actually, majority of things that you're ever going to eat, you won't just eat it once,
Yeah.
like ever. But in that moment you feel so strongly about it. And the term that you used there, which was unconditional permission to eat, yeah, unconditional permission to eat, is a strong one, and I've been utilizing it on like at least like one day every week now, where I do a maintenance day in this diet, and I know we've spoke about this before, but um, it's been a game changer in the ability to just like have a lifestyle and have a life outside of the diet, but also take away all the need for tracking or the need to kind of honor those things where you just do the things that you're speaking about, but you have more calories than what you're having on the other days. And it's
Yeah. And I think like giving yourself unconditional permission does not necessarily mean that you eat all day and like you eat everything in sight. It just means that you're giving yourself permission to eat the things that you want to. And yeah.
Yeah, because there always has to be rules. Like humans, we work well on rules, and don't. We either go through order and chaos, right? The famous Jordan Peterson built order and chaos, right? So like, when there's no order, there's always chaos. So if you give yourself permission to unconditionally eat, then you're with no rules or no order, then you are going to just take the piss and you are going to eat more and you are just going to go to the point where you're like, oh yeah, this is fine. I'm not actually that stuffed, even though you're like, you can't breathe because you've ate so much.
Yeah.
But then when there's too many rules, then we don't have the ability to be creative, and we don't have the ability to probably enjoy social events and enjoy those times where you probably feel that that's where guilt and probably shame operate a lot, because you're like, oh, I wish I could do that, or oh, I haven't been able to do that, or this and that and the other. So, I think in terms of the podcast, it's like it's really gone in a way where we gave the fundamentals of the rules, like the honoring of the hunger cues, chewing nice and slowly, stopping when you feel like, even if you've conditioned yourself not to and you want to kind of smash that plate. But then once you honor these variables, that ability to be unconditional will actually serve you so well. And like, I don't even think, for me personally, that I'm in this position to be able to do that. I don't know if I trust myself enough yet. And it's actually a journey that actually I don't think you'll go on. Well, you won't trust yourself until you trust yourself. And
Yeah.
like, and you have to expect the ability to have a few failures along the way.
Yeah, I agree. And I think like for me, when I stepped away from transitioning, I think a lot of like my perfectionism kind of kicked in. So I expected myself to do things absolutely perfectly, and understanding that you're going to fail and that there are going to be times where things are not going to go the way that you want it to go, and accepting that it's okay if it goes the other way. I think that's really important. And I think that you need to constantly validate yourself and understand why you're on that journey. And I think, like for me, that made a huge, huge, huge difference, because it's easy to just tell yourself, okay, like I'm going to do this and that everything is okay. But it's different to actually, like, even when you do fail, to kind of like go on and understand why you're doing it.
Yeah, because the worst thing you can do in that scenario is uh overcompensate, or you double down, right? So you double down by saying tomorrow's going to be better, it's going to be amazing, I'm going to be super super mindful tomorrow. And then the
Yeah.
other side is that you overcompensate, or don't, you overcompensate by you going back to tracking the day after, and you go back super super restrictive, or you end up not tracking but end up eating fucking oxygen and dust because you're trying to make up for it. And that the validation that you spoke about then is really important, that you just operate on a quest of, why did that happen? How did that happen? What can I learn tomorrow? Instead of it waiting 7 days or 14 days for you to ask that question, you ask yourself that question an hour afterwards or 2 hours afterwards, or if you can do, just whenever you get a bit of free time, just start validating that. What can I learn about that? And tomorrow will be better. So now I want to flip gears into the training side of things. So, a conversation that we had a while back was that, and I love the conversation that we had. It was like, um, I'm getting pissed off because I'm losing weight, and that means I can't get stronger in the gym. And like, talk to us about your journey with training itself, and when it started and where it's at now, and like what you're aiming for when it comes to your training.
Okay, so when I first started, I think obviously my main goal was to just lose weight. I had zero knowledge of training. This is when like Instagram first kind of started, and like we were kind of Michelle Lewin, was Maria Aris. I don't know if you remember those people, but it was like that era of fitness. And most of the workouts that I followed was like what they did or like what they posted. So I'd save those workouts and go and do it in the gym. And it was mostly like a variation of HIIT workout, lots of cardio, and like maybe a lot more like circuit training. And then there was this person that I started following. Her name was, at that time, it was like Lady Fitzgerald or something like that. And I really, really, really liked the way that she was training. So what I would do is I would save, I didn't have data on my phone at that time, because it was like you only had a certain amount of data. So I would take a video of her training on my iPad and take it to the gym and make sure that I was doing the way that she was doing it. And then I'd film myself. So that was like the first time that I started getting into like actual like lifting, like properly making sure that my form was correct, all of those stuff. And then transitioned into more the powerlifting style of training because I loved lifting heavy. So I transitioned into that. And then now I'm at a place where it's a combination of both. So I do a lot of powerlifting movements, but also I do a lot more like just bodybuilding style of training as well. And like before, my goal was weight loss, and it has been that for a very long time. Whereas now it's more, I just do it because I enjoy it. And I don't necessarily have like a physique or aesthetic goals anymore. It's just I just want to lift heavy.
Okay.
So that's basically where I'm at right now.
What makes lifting heavy enjoyable to you?
Mm. I think it's like that feeling of just that, like when you feel really strong, the fact that you were able to lift like 100 kilo off the floor, like that, because I'm like 5'3", and I'm very petite. So for me, being able to lift that is like wow, like I did that, and it's just a way that I kind of prove my strength to myself. Yeah.
That's as you mentioned before, it's about that self validity on a
Yeah.
day-to-day basis with food, but also then self-validity with training as well. So when you were doing the whole hit style workouts, Michelle Lewin, um, and then you transitioned to now the strongmans, the powerlifting stuff. Was there a transition period with that as well, where you started to care less about the way that you looked and more towards those feeling-based goals? How did that go smooth sailing? Was there any hiccups? Like, how did that transition go?
I think it took me a long time to let go of the idea of like weight loss. And even now I have to kind of catch myself when I am in that mentality, because it's what I have just kind of wanted for myself for so long. And when I first started lifting heavy, I didn't even know like the powerlifting was a thing. I remember there was a guy in the gym who was a trainer from Genesis and Genesis.
Yeah.
So we had a couple of sessions, and he was like, "Oh, you'd be great at like powerlifting." And then I would kind of like go home, Google all of that stuff, find a program that was more powerlifting based. And then I went to Genesis, and there was a girl, and she was lifting like ridiculous amount of weight, and she had a very good physique as well. And for me, that was kind of like, oh, okay, so I can do this and still have this thing as well. So yeah.
And how, like before you're doing your sessions now, what type of routine do you take yourself through? How do you project what you're gonna lift next week, this week, or and how do you like get yourself in that performance zone to make progress?
So currently, right now, I'm only training 3 days a week. So it's not like a whole lot. But I do 3 days a week of like full body with obviously squat, deadlift, and bench as like the main lifts. So I track everything that I do on True Coach. And obviously there are times where I am probably not pushing myself as much as I need to. And that's where like obviously him is like, hey, look, like I see that last week you've done this many reps and with this weight, and this week you're doing the same amount with this reps. Like, and I would take a video of myself, send it to him, and then he'd be like, okay, now we need to up the weight a little bit. And yeah.
Yeah. No, that makes total sense. And the ability to have a coach and stuff like that is always super useful when it comes to that. And that transition period that you speak about is often where a lot of people get lost from a general population perspective. They don't know how to let go of that goal that they've had for like 20 years of their life. And then they bring it to a point where they're like, oh my God, what do I do now? What do I aim towards? And I'm like, how often do you like, or if you do, set targets for yourself, or you know, put yourself in the zone where you're like, okay, I'd like to lift that 100 kilo off the floor. I'd like to get excited about that. You know, how often are you making those targets when you first started versus now?
Um, so when I've decided like, okay, so this beginning of this year, I had this huge kind of a change in mentality towards training. I decided that I was going to do it because I enjoy it, and obviously there are some goals that I needed to set for myself. So there was a time where I was lifting like 140 kg on deadlift, 120 kg on squats, and we can't talk about bench, but but like that for me, my main goal was to get back to that place with the current body weight. So it's still my goal. I've had a few hiccups in between, but hopefully that's where I'm kind of headed towards now.
Yeah, that's good. And then, so that's really training, and that's like a nutrition side of things. What else do you think was like a quintessential part in your ability to like kind of transition to performance related stuff, but also transition to non-tracking? Like, do you do self-work? Do you do like journaling? Like, what keeps you grounded to a point that you're able to be more in tune with your body? Because everything that you said in this podcast is all to do with like the inside, right?
Yeah. So I started journaling more often this year, and I do it every single day now. And it has honestly changed like so much of the way that I view myself and my relationship with my body and the relationship with those around me. And I think for me, like whenever I journal, the first thing that I kind of do is body check-in. So I sit with myself for 2 minutes, close my eyes, and just think about where I'm feeling, how I'm feeling, whether like is any part of my body really tense? Am I clenching my jaw really hard, or am I like, am I just squeezing my traps really hard, or just carrying stress around it? And that has really helped me just build better connection with my body, along with obviously the hunger cues and stuff. So right now I feel like I'm very much in tune with my body and where it's at. Yeah.
No, that's great. And I think, I'm a big proponent of that, and like therapy and all of the works that come from like cognitive side of things and mental side of things. And they all really do bleed into one, right? I don't believe that if you've got this perfect, sorry, if you don't have a great ability to understand yourself, you don't have the ability to probably rate your hunger cues or be able to control those. And then equally, you probably don't even know what's going on from a physical perspective in terms of like body checking as well. Like it probably for me, it's been one of those things where if I checked my body now, I would not be happy with where it is. But because I just want to continue going forwards and ignore it, then it's absolutely fine. It's fine for now. But you have to learn those things, right? And they become skills over time. And I think most people do it in a transitionary phase of like their journey of fitness. I think most people's journeys of fitness go like fat loss, go to the gym, then intermediate is like maintenance and understanding maintenance, and then it's like lifting for progression. And then when that runs out and there is that element of like progression is being blocked by either like poor nutrition or lifestyle or headspace or mindset, then you start looking at more mindset related stuff, and then you start seeing things that are in your outside of life, your periphery, your relationships, your family, your mood, your work stresses, your whatever it is. They become being able to bleed into this middle ground of this inner person. And then ultimately then that's what happens, is that at the end point, when you realize that you're all fucked and you realize you've got all these stresses and you've got all of these things going on, then you have to serve the only thing that you really have, which is your body on the inside, and the external just doesn't really matter. Same with like clothing and Rolexes and cars and stuff like that. It's like you can't really have those things and enjoy them if you're completely fucked on the inside. So, any final words and parting words about your ability to any reading that you did in terms of like any books or anything like that when it comes to the body checking or the moving away from tracking?
Yeah, I was actually so books like Just Eat It, Intuitive Eating, The Binge Code, I think those are really good. And it's not necessarily, does not mean that you have to go into intuitive eating, but there are a lot of stuff that you can learn from and like adopt into your lifestyle. It doesn't have to be like all intuitive eating. It can be a little bit of like what you can still get to your goals by doing all of those things. So I think Just Eat It, The Binge Code, Intuitive Eating, those are probably like the books that have helped me a lot. So yeah, I'd highly recommend it.
Yeah, no, that was great. Well, thank you very much for coming on the podcast, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
No worries.